The morning alarm at Fort Jackson pierced through the desert air at 0500 hours, but Jennifer Davis had been awake for 30 minutes already. At 34, the former reconnaissance soldier moved through her morning routine with practiced efficiency, the same movements that had once kept her alive across 3 continents. Those days felt like a lifetime ago. Now she served as a civilian marksmanship instructor, teaching environmental factors and target analysis to recruits who treated her like an unwelcome substitute teacher. The whispered nickname followed her across the base like a shadow: TikTok Sergeant. The origin remained a mystery even to those who used it, but the contempt was unmistakable. To them, she was just another washed-up instructor relegated to holding clipboards and pointing at weather charts, while the real soldiers did the important work. Jennifer had accepted the civilian contractor position 18 months ago, specifically requesting assignment to basic environmental training. Her personnel file listed her as a former staff sergeant with standard qualifications, nothing that would raise eyebrows or invite questions. The deeper records, the ones that mattered, remained classified at levels these soldiers would never see. The training room buzzed with restless energy from 20-something soldiers who carried themselves with the particular swagger of those who had never faced genuine consequence. Lieutenant Michael Rodriguez commanded the space with the confidence that came from textbook knowledge and theoretical experience. His condescending manner toward Jennifer had been consistent since her arrival, professional enough to avoid formal complaint, personal enough to establish hierarchy. Jennifer began her presentation on environmental factors, explaining how wind patterns, humidity, and temperature gradients affected projectile trajectory at extended ranges. The science was precise, mathematical, unforgiving. At distances beyond 800 yards, understanding these variables meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. When she referenced practical applications, Rodriguez interjected with questions about her combat experience, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. The implication was clear. Academic knowledge couldn't replace battlefield reality. The room's energy shifted as soldiers sensed permission to dismiss her expertise entirely. Jennifer maintained her composure, while Corporal Tyler Johnson made an observation about the difference between hitting paper targets and understanding real tactical situations. The comment sparked muffled laughter and knowing looks, another moment of casual humiliation that had become routine. She quietly closed her laptop and gathered her materials, announcing they would continue the following day. Her departure was measured, controlled, each footstep echoing with the discipline of someone who had learned to contain far more dangerous impulses than irritation. That evening, Jennifer sat alone in her apartment, mechanically working through a dinner she barely tasted. Her phone displayed old photographs from a different life, images from deployments when she wore the call sign Falcon 7. In one photo, she stood with her team beside a disabled enemy position, her spotter Marcus Thompson grinning beside her with the easy camaraderie of soldiers who had shared mortal danger. The memory of his final words over the radio that October night in 2013 struck her like a physical blow. His voice, steady despite the chaos around their compromised position, had been the last thing she heard before the world exploded in fire and smoke. The guilt that followed wasn't rational, she knew that intellectually, but guilt rarely consulted reason before taking residence in the human heart. Later that night, she made her way to the base armory. Sergeant Robert Wilson signed out her personal rifle with the same routine they had established months ago. The Barrett M82 had been her companion through 3 deployments, its weight and balance as familiar as her own heartbeat. Wilson was one of the few NCOs who treated her with genuine respect, perhaps sensing something in her bearing that spoke of experiences beyond civilian instruction. The shooting range stood empty under an ocean of stars. Jennifer moved to the 1,000-yard line, setting up her rifle with unconscious precision. The familiar ritual of preparation, adjusting the bipod, checking the scope, reading the wind, transported her to a state of absolute focus that had once been the difference between life and death. The shot rang out across the empty range, the sound echoing off distant hills like distant thunder. Through her scope, she could see the result, dead center, exactly where she had intended. The spent casing ejected smoothly, spinning through the air before landing with a metallic whisper on the concrete. As she packed her equipment, Jennifer noticed Wilson watching from the shadows near the range office. He approached with the careful respect that senior NCOs showed each other, commenting that those kids in training had no idea what real marksmanship looked like. Jennifer replied that they didn't need to know her background, they just needed to learn the fundamentals that might keep them alive. But privately, she wondered if conventional teaching methods would ever be sufficient to overcome their arrogance. 3 days later brought an announcement that made Jennifer's stomach tighten with familiar tension. Colonel Amanda Johnson revealed a special evaluation exercise scheduled for the following week, a live fire assessment at extended range with Pentagon observers coming to evaluate the unit's operational readiness. The political implications were clear. Careers would be made or broken based on the results. Lieutenant Rodriguez seized the opportunity with visible enthusiasm, his eyes bright with ambition as he outlined his team's preparation strategy. Jennifer found herself officially designated as Environmental Support Observer, essentially relegated to providing weather updates while others handled the actual shooting. The assignment was calculated, designed to reinforce her secondary role in the exercise. Rodriguez made his expectations clear during the pre-exercise briefing. Environmental factors were important, but real marksmanship came from instinct and experience that couldn't be taught from textbooks. His team had trained extensively for this moment, and he was confident in their abilities to demonstrate superior tactical proficiency. Jennifer listened to the briefing with growing concern. The environmental conditions for the scheduled exercise would be challenging: shifting winds, thermal effects from heated ground, and atmospheric pressure changes that would affect bullet trajectory in ways these soldiers didn't fully understand. Her recommendations for extended preparation time were noted, but ultimately dismissed as overcautious. The morning of the exercise dawned clear and mercilessly hot. Pentagon observers arrived in staff vehicles, 3 officials whose combat ribbons and bearing commanded immediate respect throughout the command structure. Colonel Johnson moved among them with nervous energy, her career advancement clearly dependent on the day's results. Jennifer was positioned in the observation tower with high-powered spotting equipment, tasked with providing environmental readings and target confirmation. From her elevated position, she could see the entire range complex and monitor conditions that ground-level shooters couldn't detect. Rodriguez positioned his best marksmen on the firing line with ceremonial precision, each soldier representing months of preparation and training. The targets, standard military silhouettes, were positioned at exactly 1,000 yards, a distance that separated competent shooters from truly exceptional ones. The first shooter took his position with confidence that bordered on arrogance. Jennifer studied the environmental conditions through her instruments, noting wind patterns that would require specific adjustments for elevation and deflection. Her calculations were precise, based on years of experience with similar conditions, but her radio recommendations were acknowledged with perfunctory courtesy and largely ignored. The shot rang out across the range, followed by the electronic confirmation of impact, 6 inches low, 4 inches left of center. The shooter immediately blamed shifting wind conditions, though Jennifer's instruments showed the wind had remained steady throughout his preparation and execution. For 3 brutal hours, team after team stepped up to the 1,000-yard line and delivered increasingly disappointing results. Jennifer provided detailed environmental corrections that were consistently disregarded in favor of the shooter's personal instincts and training. The Pentagon observers made meticulous notes, their expressions growing more serious with each missed shot. The breaking point came when Corporal Johnson approached the firing line for his attempt. Jennifer observed a significant shift in thermal patterns that would affect bullet trajectory, requiring specific adjustments to compensate for the changing conditions. Her radio call with precise corrections was acknowledged with barely concealed irritation and completely ignored. Johnson's response carried across the range with devastating clarity, thanking the civilian instructor for her input while making it clear that he trusted his own training over theoretical calculations. The firing line erupted in supportive laughter, a moment of casual cruelty that revealed everything wrong with the unit's culture. Jennifer clicked off her microphone and watched in silence as Johnson fired his shot. The bullet struck the earth 12 inches left of the target, exactly where her calculations had predicted, given his refusal to adjust for the thermal conditions. By noon, not a single shooter had managed to achieve center mass at the 1,000-yard distance. The Pentagon observers were openly concerned, and Colonel Johnson looked like she was contemplating the end of her military career. The afternoon brought more of the same: missed shots, ignored advice, and mounting frustration from leadership. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Colonel Johnson called for a final round of attempts. The desperation in her demeanor was obvious to everyone on the range. Lieutenant Rodriguez stepped up to the firing line himself, clearly intending to salvage something from the disaster through personal example. Jennifer provided her most detailed corrections yet, accounting for every environmental variable that would affect his shot. His dismissal was theatrical, performed for the benefit of the observers, and designed to demonstrate his confidence in practical experience over theoretical knowledge. His shot missed the target entirely, the bullet striking sand 8 inches to the left. The sound seemed to echo longer than physics should have allowed, a monument to failure that hung in the desert air. The range fell completely silent except for the wind, which seemed to mock their collective incompetence. Sergeant Wilson's voice crackled over the radio frequency, respectfully requesting permission for Instructor Davis to demonstrate proper environmental compensation techniques. Rodriguez's response was immediate and sharp. Regulations prohibited civilian contractors from participating in official military evaluations, regardless of their theoretical knowledge. But Colonel Johnson, facing the destruction of her career and the humiliation of her command, looked toward the observation tower where Jennifer sat with her rifle case. The colonel's voice was barely audible as she granted authorization for a single demonstration shot, one opportunity to show these soldiers what they were missing. Jennifer descended from the observation tower, aware that every eye on the range was tracking her movement. She knelt beside the shooting bench and opened her rifle case with deliberate precision. The Barrett M82 emerged like a familiar friend returning from a long absence, its weight and balance exactly as she remembered. The conversations around the range died as soldiers realized this wouldn't be another embarrassing failure. Something in Jennifer's handling of the weapon spoke of competence that went far beyond classroom instruction, the kind of muscle memory that only developed under circumstances they couldn't imagine. Jennifer settled into her shooting position, adjusting equipment with movements so practiced they appeared choreographed. The complex calculations began immediately, mathematics that had once determined whether missions succeeded or failed, whether soldiers lived or died. Range, 1,057 yards, measured by laser. Wind, northeast at 7 miles per hour, but her cheek against the stock detected pressure changes that indicated gusting patterns invisible to ground-level observation. Temperature, 86 degrees and climbing, creating thermal effects that would influence trajectory in ways these soldiers couldn't comprehend. But there was something else. A subtle atmospheric pressure shift that spoke of weather front movement. The wind would change just as her bullet reached the target area, requiring her to compensate not for current conditions, but for conditions that would exist when the projectile arrived downrange. Her breathing slowed, heart rate dropped, and the familiar state of absolute focus settled over her like armor forged from experience and necessity. Through her scope, the target appeared impossibly small, no larger than a coin wavering in heat shimmer at a distance that rendered human targets nearly invisible to the naked eye. She thought of Marcus Thompson, of his sacrifice, of promises made in blood and kept in silence. This shot would honor his memory, vindicate every student who deserved competent instruction, and prove that excellence couldn't be silenced by ignorance or diminished by casual cruelty. The trigger broke with perfect smoothness. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and the sound rolled across the range like judgment itself. For a moment that stretched toward eternity, everyone on the range watched the distant target. The electronic display flashed bright confirmation, impact dead center. Not merely a hit, a perfect bullseye that registered 0.1 inches from exact center, a new base record that would stand for years. The range fell absolutely silent. Jennifer ejected the spent casing, catching it smoothly before it could strike the ground, a gesture both practical and symbolic of respect for the weapon and the moment. A voice from the observation deck shattered the silence like breaking glass. General James Anderson, her former commanding officer from Special Operations Command, spoke her old call sign with the authority of someone who had witnessed her capabilities under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Anderson descended from the observation deck with measured steps, his approach drawing every eye on the range. When he reached Jennifer's position, his words carried across the desert with absolute clarity and undeniable authority. He announced that they had just witnessed shooting from the soldier who held the longest confirmed elimination in modern military history. The details emerged like pieces of a classified puzzle. 1,847 meters, Afghanistan, October 2013. A single shot that had eliminated a high-value target and saved an entire convoy from certain destruction. The crowd of soldiers stirred audibly, their worldview shifting with each revelation. Anderson continued, his voice carrying the weight of combat experience and command authority. Staff Sergeant Jennifer Davis, call sign Falcon 7, had been medically retired after losing her spotter in the same engagement that had earned her legendary status. She had specifically requested assignment to training duties, stating that she never wanted another soldier to die because of inadequate preparation. Jennifer reached into her breast pocket and withdrew a worn photograph, her old team in Afghanistan, faces young and confident, armed with the certainty that their skills and brotherhood made them invincible. She handed the photograph to Lieutenant Rodriguez, her movements deliberate and controlled. Rodriguez studied the image, then looked at her with an expression that cycled through confusion, embarrassment, and finally something approaching genuine respect. The arrogant swagger had evaporated, replaced by the humility that should have been present from the beginning. Jennifer's response was simple and devastating. That record had belonged to her team, and she was just keeping it where it belonged until others were ready to carry it forward. The change began immediately, but unlike the dramatic reversals of fiction, it unfolded with the gradual inevitability of tide. Within hours, Jennifer's complete military record was declassified by General Anderson's authority, revealing a service history that read like the pages of military legend: multiple Bronze Stars, a Purple Heart, 4 combat deployments, and marksmanship records that had remained unbroken for over a decade. But Jennifer didn't seek revenge or public vindication. She quietly returned to her quarters and began developing the kind of advanced training program these soldiers actually needed, one built on demonstrated competence rather than theoretical authority, mutual respect rather than hierarchy-based humiliation. The transformation of individual attitudes proceeded more slowly than the administrative changes. Lieutenant Rodriguez was among the first to approach her, arriving at her office the following morning with his hat literally in his hands and his ego thoroughly deflated. His apology was comprehensive and genuine, acknowledging that his treatment of her had been both unprofessional and unjust. Jennifer's response revealed the measure of her character. She explained that he had treated her exactly as he perceived her, and the perception wasn't entirely his fault. Military culture often valued appearance over substance, rank over competence, and confidence over actual ability. His behavior had been wrong, but it was also predictably human. Rodriguez formally requested assignment to her advanced marksmanship program, asking if she would accept him as a student despite their history. The irony was obvious to both of them, but they recognized it as necessary for any possibility of redemption. Similar conversations occurred throughout the following weeks. Corporal Johnson appeared requesting permission to audit her classes, his earlier mockery replaced by genuine desire to learn from someone who had proven herself under the most extreme conditions. Private Williams asked to shadow her during equipment maintenance, eager to understand the technical aspects that separated competent shooters from exceptional ones. But the most meaningful visit came from specialist Ashley Martinez, a young woman who'd been considering leaving the military after experiencing constant dismissal and casual harassment. Seeing what Jennifer had accomplished, the respect she had earned through competence rather than demanded through rank, had changed Martinez's entire perspective on what was possible. Word of the record shot spread through military networks with the speed of digital communication. Other installations began requesting Falcon 7 as a guest instructor, and her training methods became standard curriculum at advanced marksmanship schools across the country. Traditional techniques based on outdated assumptions were replaced with proven battlefield applications. Yet Jennifer remained essentially unchanged by the recognition. She continued arriving early, staying late, and treating every student with professional courtesy, regardless of their attitude or aptitude. The base culture had shifted from one rewarding bravado to one recognizing genuine expertise, but the change was gradual and sometimes fragile. 6 weeks after the record shot, Jennifer received notification that tested everything she had rebuilt. A formal investigation had been initiated regarding training methods and leadership effectiveness at Fort Jackson, triggered by complaints alleging favoritism and inappropriate elevation of civilian personnel over military chain of command. The investigation was conducted by Inspector General Colonel Patricia Miller, whose reputation for thoroughness was matched only by her intolerance for politics or personal agendas. The accusations were serious: misrepresentation of qualifications, manipulation of military personnel, and staging publicity events designed to embarrass uniformed leadership. The complaints originated from officers who had been present during the demonstration, but had not witnessed Anderson's revelation of Jennifer's background. From their perspective, a civilian contractor had been allowed to participate in official military evaluation, potentially compromising the integrity of the assessment process. Jennifer understood the investigation's political dimensions immediately. This was an attempt to restore the previous order where incompetence could hide behind protocol and genuine expertise could be dismissed if it threatened established hierarchies. But Jennifer had spent the intervening weeks conducting her own quiet investigation into the training environment and leadership effectiveness throughout the installation. The patterns she discovered painted a disturbing picture of systematic failure disguised as military professionalism. When her opportunity came to respond, Jennifer stood before the investigation panel with the same controlled composure she had maintained under enemy fire. She acknowledged that the complaints contained legitimate concerns about protocol and procedure, but suggested that those concerns masked deeper problems with training effectiveness and leadership accountability. She presented detailed documentation, showing that marksmanship qualification rates had declined steadily over the previous 2 years. Safety incidents had increased, and student evaluations consistently criticized instructional quality and leadership attitudes. The statistics revealed a training environment where form had become more important than function, where maintaining hierarchy took precedence over developing competence. More significantly, she discovered that several instructors, including Lieutenant Rodriguez, had been teaching techniques that were not merely outdated, but potentially dangerous. Their methods increased the likelihood of equipment failure and reduced accuracy at extended ranges, exactly the kind of deficiencies that could prove fatal in actual combat situations. Sergeant Wilson provided supporting testimony, explaining his observations of the training environment before and after Jennifer's arrival. The difference wasn't merely in technical instruction, but in fundamental attitude toward learning and improvement. Students were now eager to attend classes that had previously been regarded as tedious requirements. General Anderson's final testimony carried the weight of decades in special operations and strategic command. He explained that military effectiveness ultimately depended on recognizing and utilizing competence regardless of its source, and that the most dangerous enemy of military excellence was the assumption that rank alone qualified someone to teach or lead. Colonel Miller's conclusions were unambiguous. Based on the evidence presented, she found no misconduct in Instructor Davis's behavior or qualifications. However, the investigation had revealed significant deficiencies in training methodology and leadership development that required immediate attention. Several personnel would be reassigned for additional professional development, and Jennifer would be offered a permanent position developing advanced training curriculum. 1 year later, Fort Jackson had become a model for military training effectiveness that other installations studied and attempted to replicate. The Advanced Marksmanship Training Center operated from a purpose-built facility that incorporated the latest technology with proven field techniques. Students arrived from bases across the country specifically to train under instructors who had demonstrated their competence through actual performance, rather than theoretical knowledge. Jennifer stood in her office, reviewing qualification scores that showed consistent improvement across all categories. Ashley Martinez, now wearing sergeant stripes and serving as a senior instructor, entered with the latest graduation statistics. 96% qualification rate with average scores exceeding previous records by 35%. The numbers represented more than statistical improvement. They reflected a fundamental shift in institutional culture, from one that rewarded appearance over substance to one that recognized and developed genuine competence regardless of its source or packaging. That evening, Jennifer maintained her ritual visit to the range. The practice had evolved from personal necessity to professional meditation, a time for reflection on responsibilities inherited and obligations fulfilled. Sergeant Wilson joined her, their friendship having deepened through shared commitment to professional excellence. A group of current students approached, led by former Corporal Johnson, now a senior instructor specializing in environmental factors and precision shooting. Their invitation to join them for dinner was extended with genuine warmth and respect, something that would have been unimaginable 18 months earlier. As they walked together through the cooling desert evening, Jennifer listened to animated discussions about wind reading, atmospheric effects, and mental preparation techniques. These soldiers weren't merely learning technical skills, they were developing the professional attitudes and personal character that would make them effective leaders and competent warriors. Walking back to her quarters under the vast desert sky, Jennifer felt a deep sense of completion. She still carried the weight of Marcus Thompson's death, but that burden had transformed from crushing guilt into sacred responsibility. His sacrifice had meaning because she had used her survival to prevent others from experiencing unnecessary loss. In her quarters, She added the spent casing from that day's record shot to a small collection of meaningful artifacts, not because the shot had been technically impressive, but because it represented the moment when patience and professionalism had triumphed over ignorance and institutional arrogance. The TikTok sergeant had been buried forever, replaced by someone who understood that genuine leadership came not from demanding respect, but from earning it through competence, character, and unwavering commitment to helping others achieve excellence they hadn't known was possible. The quiet ones, she reflected, were never really quiet. They were simply waiting for the right moment to speak with actions that rendered words unnecessary.